Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. Hi, David. How are you?
I'm well, Guy.
So here we are back again.
We are indeed.
So I posed a question. I don't know if we're going to take it in turns or just as these things come up, but I've been, as I do, spending my time looking at the world through the social media lens, and I kind of came to this position of sensing that there's a question which is, do I have a voice? And that question, do I have a voice, is around people's perception of what they can influence. And there's a difference between having the power, being the person in charge or the organisation in charge, and being somebody who is within that system and actually can be heard. And I see it in organisations where when I do diagnostics and I'm working within, one of the common threads is often I'm not heard, I'm not listened to. And then we see it at social, societal levels. I think about the Oxford zoning issue that's going on at the moment, or the London ultra-low emission zones, where nobody seems to want it, but it's going to happen anyway. And you can protest, but it seems as if it's going to happen anyway. So I'm fascinated by, as we in the leadership community are talking to people about leading and being a leader, but actually I wonder if there's almost a societal issue where people are feeling quite disempowered. And when we're asking people to step up and have an opinion and be curious and be bold, but actually the indicators might be, what's the point? Now, I just would like to have that conversation because I think that's relevant and something just to talk about.
I wonder the extent to which the feeling of powerlessness is just that our world is so interconnected and so many things seem to be out of our control that we're trying to seize back control where we think we might be able to pull it off, as it were. I was thinking of, the cost of living crisis at the moment. How much of that is completely not just beyond our control, but beyond the UK's control. That when we are looking at a war in Europe, which is changing the prices of energy, and energy is such an important part of our world, particularly in the winter when we need to heat our houses and so on. An awful lot of the factors that are generating a cost of living crisis are beyond the control not just of you and me, but of our government as well. It's very hard to imagine how you could seize back control over that. So maybe there's a kind of, that sets up a clamour for the kind of control over the day-to-day things that we think we ought to be able to influence. Like, for example, whether, I live in Bristol, and, there's been the whole debate about should there be an ultra-low emission zone in the middle of Bristol. I don't remember being asked my opinion about it, but I'm quite sure that even if I were, no one would give it the slightest bit of attention. And the extent to which that feels wrong in a country which we use words to describe about being free and being democratic, and and in which the opinions of the citizen in the country are supposed to matter. So whether that is a particularly acute feeling at the moment, whether an awful lot of big things are out of our control, or whether it's a sort of a permanent desire to have some sort of influence over this decision making that affects me. I certainly see it as you do in organisations, that people feel that it should be possible that if there's a particular aspect of our work that involves me particularly centrally, then why doesn't someone ask me what I want?
I totally hear that, and there's so many little things going on that at one end I feel that certain people have a sense of, and I'm going to use the word because I just haven't got a better one, of almost helplessness. And that could be, I've got this mortgage to pay. I didn't overextend myself, but now it's gone up. I've got to pay, the petrol. I built a sensible car. I didn't go crazy, but now, petrol's gone up. And actually, when I see the news and I look around on the media, people at senior levels, if they make a mistake, they seem to just be sacked but get a massive pension payoff, and they seem to go and get a job somewhere else, or they're not really a politician can make a statement about leaving Brexit and make a wild claim, and when it turns out to be fictitious, there's no backlash for it. If I say something like that, if I'm at work and I say something outrageous, there's a punishment, there's a repercussion. And I wonder if certain people, and everybody, there'll be a distribution curve where this doesn't come into some people's thinking, but I have a sense of the workplace is related to what's going on in society. And if people feel disconnected in society, then that manifests itself to a greater or lesser degree in the workplace. If people see people who maybe could or should be role models behaving in a certain way, because we may operate at a relatively senior level, you and I, we have that privilege, but for a lot of people, they're looking 3, 4, 5 layers up. And the presumption is that they are like them, the people that I see in the media. And I wonder if that just gives me a sense of people having a loss of connection with their personal power, their capacity to have a voice, and their bravery to have a voice because of both real and perceived repercussions, but also a sense maybe of what's the point?
Yeah, I get it. You raise a number of issues, though. That there is a field of study in psychology which is based around what's called the just world hypothesis, which is that that it comforts us all to believe that somehow the world is just. That if you do bad things, you get punished. If you do good things, you get rewarded, and bad things shouldn't therefore happen to good people. That all of these are, the moment you say them, they sound simple-minded and wrong, but actually it generates an awful lot of our behaviour, that belief, and therefore our sense of outrage when bad things do happen to good people, or when people are self-evidently wrong and maybe even being deliberately mendacious or manipulative. Why does no one hold them to account? In a just world, that should happen, and an awful lot derives from that fundamental belief. But one of the ways I think that we learn that we're growing up is that we realise that the world isn't just, that the world is not always fair, that bad things do happen to good people and good things to bad people. And somehow we've just got to adjust to that. So that's part of just the kind of maturation and growing up process. But still, I think we're left, all of us, with a residue that certain things should not be allowed, should be stopped. Do you remember the whole debate about Saddam Hussein? Why does nobody stop him, doing these bad things? And then we go in and do it, and we find that we've done it for reasons that turned out to have been a falsehood. And so we get caught in this kind of maelstrom of something should be done, something was done, something shouldn't have been done because it was done for the wrong reasons, and so on. And so our thinking gets very muddled, I think, about the whole variety of issues to do with this notion that the world should be just.
And I notice this where I have lots of conversations with people, and one of the things I talk about is connection and that willingness to contribute outside of your own need. So call that team, call that tribe, call that whatever you like. A lot of people, nobody really, it's like fitness, nobody doesn't think it's a good idea. But actually in reality, people often have pulled in to themselves. And I notice even at social gatherings, if you start to talk about things on a larger scale, some people don't want to have that conversation. It's too overwhelming. It just makes me feel like the world's a crappy place. I just look after me and mine. And actually, if I just think about our household and not polluting it with that kind of thinking, the world's a better place. And I think, yeah, it is. Yeah, you're 100% right, because you're keeping your zone clean in some respects. And I wonder also with the media, the amount of information that comes through and the opening of the Wizard of Oz looking behind the curtain, which we seem to be doing a lot of now. We're so aware of so many things that are happening. For some people, I think it's just almost an overwhelming sense of there's so much going on that is either underhand or potentially deceitful. I would rather pull away from holding space and having an opinion and talking about it. And because actually, if I get annoyed about it, it takes up headspace and it takes up my emotional battery.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't want to do that. And I think that starts to manifest at an almost a societal level of pulling away, being a little bit more insulated. And that manifests then in the workplace where people they don't know their neighbours, they're not taking an interest in what's going on in their local area. And I just think a lot of this plays out in a way that I haven't done the scientific research on, but I have a sense of those things being true. And I'm very keen on how we give people the capacity to be involved and have an opinion and hold their space.
Well, you raise many topics for me. The first is that there is an individual difference. There's a dimension along which people differ, which is to do with how big picture minded or detail minded they are. If you've ever done the Myers-Briggs, there's a distinction between the S and the N type. Where S is detail-oriented, N is more intuitive and big picture and future-oriented. It's almost as if if you figure out where they're looking, some people are looking just 1 or 2 feet in front of them, and others are looking at the horizon, and it's an area of individual difference. So that's the first thing that it put me in mind of, and that is that that even when someone is terribly well adjusted and perfectly happy and feeling resilient and full of joys of spring, if they're a detail-minded person, guess what? They'll look at the details and they'll look at the things that are close and immediate and present now. And that's not in any way a deficit. It's just their preference about how they like to perceive the world. They like to perceive it close and in terms of things they can be sure about, where others are happy to look further away, further distant in time, and also deal with much more matters of uncertainty, and they're comfortable doing that. So that's the first thought that came to my mind. But the second is that I think your hypothesis is that a response to feeling powerlessness is that you draw your horizons in and you control the things that you can control, which are more likely to be close and present.
Yes.
Than distant and bigger picture, and I think that probably both are true. So that in tough times, people get very concerned with what's in front of them, whereas some people, when times are better, are very happy to look much further afield. So I think there are two things going on. There's an environmental thing in which we're responding to local difficulties and our feelings of powerlessness or powerfulness. But the other is just simply the individual difference, that I'm the kind of person that likes to look at big picture issues and so on. The old joke is, my wife deals with all the trivia, in our home, things like where the kids are going to go to school and, how we're going to pay all the bills and all that sort of stuff. But I look after the big things in life, like, whether or not we should have left the European Union. but there's just an element of truth that, that people's preferences are marked and different along those lines. But the second thing that it puts me in mind of, Guy, is the idea that how do I know I've got a voice? How do I know if I'm being listened to? Because let me tell you a real example. I ran for a number of years a consultancy, and one of the issues in our office was how we deployed the rooms for different purposes. And I was very conscious that I needed to give everyone in the office a say in how we used the rooms in the office. This is a very local, very parochial, very small issue. And a number of people said very clearly that they wanted to use a particular room as an expansion of the general office, to give more room for the people doing the administrative tasks that lay behind our consultancy. I wanted to use it that same room as a client room because it was close to the front door. It was a very smart, very, very nice, very comfortable room in which clients could feel welcomed and received and so on. So I said to people I was going to consult them about this. And so I consulted. And there was a slight majority in favour of using it as an expansion of the general office. And I overruled that. It's my business. I overruled. I overruled it.
The benevolent dictator.
Not even that benevolent, I think they thought at the time. But because I wanted to put the client's needs a little bit higher up the totem pole. And I explained that I'd listened to the arguments. Thank you for taking part. On balance, I think I'm going to go the route of we're going to use this for client purposes. And the complaint came back. Then why ask us if you're not going to do what we say? And then I realised that in using the word consult, I needed to define my terms. And in fact, I've written about this now in some of the books I've been writing about this whole power shift. What I mean by consult is I want to know what you think, but I'm going to decide. So if I consult somebody, that's what I mean. Now, if I involve them in the decision making, that's a different word. What I mean is we will decide together. Yeah? Or, shifting the power even further, I might delegate the decision. And if I delegated it, particularly to our office manager at the time, guess what? That room would have been used as an expansion of the general office. And I shouldn't have complained about it because I delegated. But when I used the word consult, I meant something very specific, which is I want to know what you think, but I'm going to decide, having in mind what you've told me and thinking hard about it, but that doesn't mean that you've got a veto. You have a voice, but you don't have a veto. And that, I think, is somewhere in those words, consult, involve, delegate, veto. There might be some clues about what you're noticing. Is that we say one thing but actually think about and mean another, and maybe if our message is to leaders, at least the message that I bring at the business school to leaders is be very clear which of those words you mean, and say the one that you mean. And if you're going to say I'm going to consult you, make it very clear that doesn't mean to say that this is not a plebiscite. It's not that 52 to 48 we leave the European Union. If that had been a consultative referendum, the government could still have decided to stay in. Now, if it had been sort of 90-10, they'd have been stupid to do that. But on a marginal call, if you've consulted, it makes great sense still to make a decision, having in mind that 52% wanted one thing and 48 another. But it doesn't mean that you have to do it. It's consultative.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That the vocabulary.
You've got a voice. You do have a voice. People are thinking about it. They're not ignorant of the fact that I wasn't ignorant of the fact that several people in the office wanted one thing and I chose the other. But I did it realizing that I was actually then going against the grain, and I needed to spend a lot of time talking to people about why I'd done that.
I think there's a lot going on there about the responsibility of people in positional roles to understand through their language and their intent the experience they'll be generating for the people that are at the other end. There's also something about people who are within a process almost meeting in the middle of the bridge, and that's around that willingness to understand that there are hierarchies, there are systems, there are processes, people have to make decisions. Sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it doesn't. And that question that I asked at the start, do I have a voice? There might be some organisations or some relationships or some situations where you don't. No, and it's very clear that you're not being asked, you're not being consulted, there's not even a pretense of caring about your opinion. Okay, so you clearly don't have a voice. Other than if you leave, your voice is, I'm out of here. and that's, we're not always financially able to do that, but we can ultimately achieve that. There is something about what I notice is that people that retain their resilience, and this phrase anti-fragile, become less fragile, are the ones that don't stop having an opinion and don't stop offering it, that's not through sabotage or monopolizing a conversation, but it's when you lose the energy to keep having an opinion, and it's when you lose the energy to stop offering it, regardless of what happens to it. That's when I see people get smaller, the volume on them goes down, and their resilience, and they become fragile because they have dropped below that proverbial line of accountability. It's been done to them, almost as against, well, it may be being done to me, but it doesn't stop me offering, having, not letting my opinion go, regardless of what's done with it. So I think there's a responsibility at both ends that I sometimes wonder if the weight of things, just at the moment, maybe we've had COVID, maybe we're in a financial, situation which is quite hard for some people. So I do sense that people have got the wind knocked out of them. But I think my call to arms is don't stop pushing forward on an opinion, on a position, because once you do that, you become damaged.
Well, I think that there is. I think there are different issues at different levels. If you take the organisation level, I think I detect a really strong shift that's happening in the field of leadership. That's my field, and it's the shift towards what's called plural leadership. That is that the old idea that one person was the kind of the big boss. They were kind of expected to have a monopoly on wisdom and to understand the world better than anybody else, and often were better educated. And if you go far enough back, they were also aristocrats, so they had a say in how the county was run and maybe even the country. What's happening in the 21st century is that people are realizing that the world is moving at such pace and in such I was going to say unpredictable ways, but I think I probably mean more like multiple ways simultaneously. That the likelihood of one person having a monopoly on wisdom is tending to zero. So what do you need? You need more eyes, more ears, more brains involved in looking at the way the world's shaping up and coming to decisions about how we should act in this world. So, where does strategy come from? It comes from looking around your organisation, trying to make sense of this chaotic picture that's emerging, telling yourself the story of what's actually happening, sharing that with everybody, and getting loads and loads of people deciding minimally how we're going to act in this world. And maybe there are even bigger questions about what it is we should be doing and why. But minimally, how. You can always consult about that. And you're crazy not to, for several reasons. One, people are likely to come up with and notice things that you're not noticing and you need to be noticing, and they can point them out to you. And the second is that they'll get committed to a course of action if they've got a say in deciding what it should be. And the other thing is that if you don't give people that kind of a voice, that kind of influence, then your good people who have choices will leave and go and work for somebody else, and you'll be left with all the plonkers, so who've got no choices. So at the organisation level, I think that shift is happening for good reasons. Now, at the national level, I think it's really rather different. Take a real example. Hanging. In my lifetime, in our lifetime, we've gone from hanging people who've been committed capital offences to not hanging them, and now capital punishment is not tolerated in any way in the UK. There are still some countries in which it is, but in many Western countries now there is no capital punishment. For years and years and years, by far the vast majority of the population were in favour of hanging, but Parliament decided against it. Now, our democracy is meant to be a representative democracy. And how does it work? Well, I have a vote. I vote for somebody. In my constituency, it's Thangam Demodare, and she goes to Westminster and she represents my constituency. And then she has an opinion and she votes on issues in Parliament, and Parliament decides what to do. Now, she doesn't keep checking. David, what was it you said you wanted? That's not how it works. I vote for her. She goes into Parliament. The representatives make the decision. And where's our country gone wrong a number of times recently? When we went in for referendums. We nearly lost Scotland. We did lose the EU. And if we're not careful, we'll do it again. Because it's not meant to be a plebiscite-based democracy. It's meant to be a representative democracy, and it's supposed to work in a particular way. And I like that. I want to vote. I want to be able to vote Thangam Debonair out if she turns out not to be a good representative of my opinion. So I'm going to vote against her if that's what happens, or in favour of her continually if she continues to do a good job for that. But that's the extent to which I want to say. I then want to trust those representatives to make good decisions on the nation's behalf. And if that means, therefore, that in Bristol there's an ultra-low emission zone, why? Because the country has committed itself to climate change goals, global warming, anti-global warming. Therefore, the central government leans on all the local authorities to bring in lots of local actions which will reduce greenhouse gases and therefore slow down the heating of the planet. If that means that it browns me off because I haven't got a say on whether there's an ultra-low emission zone in Bristol, I'm happy to live with that if it's part of that broader representative democracy. So I've raised lots of things. What I'm saying is organisations, I can see one picture. I think nationally I see a different picture.
If they gave you a referendum in Bristol, would you participate?
Yes. Only because I'm thinking about the two levels again. If an opinion survey or an engagement survey runs in an organisation I work for, I'm crazy not to take part. However, and this happens, if repeatedly the management team ignore the data, guess what? I'll learn not to vote. They'll teach me that there's no point.
Yeah.
But if people are interested in my opinion, I'm happy to give it, as you know, to your cost. But if that happens, I will, of course, give an opinion. But if, as a result of that, the local council decided, 90% of people said they didn't want an ultra-low emission zone, but when we look at the climate change goals we've all signed up for already, I'm afraid ultra-low emission is the only sensible way to go. We're going to do it anyway. I'd say, okay, but everyone's doing the job. Everyone's doing their job.
See, that's where I would participate. And if 93% or whatever it is, let's say in Oxford, that have said no, and they're going to bring it in, or these zones that they're going to bring in anyway, you see, I think that does a couple of things. And I might just be talking from the position of not quite understanding it well enough. But I get the fact that somebody who's been voted into a role has the capacity to make a decision. Otherwise, hey, we have chaos. But then again, if we've asked people and 93% say no, then, that was fair and democratic. So we say no, which is different, as you quite rightly say, to a societal level and maybe an organisational level. But actually, if we're going to ask our people and we're going to say, let's have a vote on that, and we'll, as you say, it's not, is it consultative or is it delegation or is it that you're involved? If we're getting those statements right, then I guess there is something to be paid attention to there around where people again feel heard or not heard or then ignored. And I think that's where people's frustrations come in. So it's not easy to have a position where we need to make a decision, but we also sometimes want to get people's opinions. But if we take people's opinions, then by definition, have we agreed or are we clear and are we verbalised that we will hold to that regardless of whether or not it fits in with our strategy or our plan? And I guess while all of that's going on, the person maybe at the bottom of the food chain who's involved in these things, be it in the workplace or in the world, can have these varying levels of frustrations of not being heard. And actually hearing you and I talk, which is partly what this is about, where we're not sending out to the world what you should do is, it actually reinforces something that I do say in the workplace when I'm coaching. And and sort of doing the team effectiveness work, is the biggest thing you can do is give up and become exasperated to the point of non-contribution. Because the moment you stop contributing, the moment you stop holding on to, not just holding an opinion, but bringing it to play, even if you're constantly rejected, even if you're constantly knocked back, the moment you let go of doing something with it as an action, that's, I think, where the powerlessness starts to come in.
Yeah,
and just let me finish one more thing. I actually think it's almost better to hold on to an opinion and offer it and be constantly rejected, because at least then you can feel that you have a sense of personal control and integrity versus actually releasing the activity of verbalizing it because it's not worth it. So actually the frustration of being knocked back is better than the powerlessness of not offering it.
Yes. Do you take part in the lottery? No, I don't. Well, there's no chance of winning then.
Yes.
But I'm conscious that if pushed into a corner, I'm arguing a slightly elitist position, which I'm uncomfortable with when I say it in those terms. So, for example, what I mean is, in Oxford, I'm absolutely in favour of protecting the remarkable, beautiful old buildings that have been there for literally hundreds of years. You know, my college is not one of the oldest, but it's been around since Henry VIII came to the throne. 1509, you're quite right. And I knew you were going to say that, weren't you? But that's right. So
I put it in the chat. Good that you picked up on that. I thought he's gonna forget when it was. I just better help him out.
So, but if you continue to pour pollutants into the air in Oxford, slowly over time you cause those beautiful buildings to deteriorate. Quite apart from the health issues of, breathing in polluted air. But there are all sorts of consequences. If you let big trucks trundle through Oxford, you shake the foundations, you undermine them. And so anyone with an eye to the beauty of those buildings and to the historical legacy of a university that's 800 years old, but if you ask most people in Oxford right now, do you want an ultra-low emission zone there? They'll say no. Why? Because it inconveniences me. It means I've got to go the long way around to get from here to there. It means, and they'll talk about things that happen right now. Yeah. Someone, I think, being responsible, needs to have a view to not even next year, the next decade, but even the next century, the century after that. 800 years ago, people were thinking not about us today, but they made decisions that have lasted for a very long time and have created a legacy that we can really enjoy. I'll give you another, but I'm conscious that overruling the population today is a very elitist position. It's kind of we know better than you do, and I'm not comfortable with saying that. But in a way, I'm slightly relieved that there is going to be an ultra-low emission zone in Oxford against the people's wishes, because that at least will look after that longer-term legacy that I would like to safeguard. The other thing is that the hanging debate, Parliament decided that it did our country's culture harm to kill people, even though the majority of the population were in favour of maintaining the death penalty. And particularly when it's a nuanced decision, like a 52-48 over Brexit, I wish someone had said, that's not enough. That 4% difference kind of makes very little difference. And it's not just a first past the post system on this decision. This is a decision that's going to affect us for years, decades, maybe even, yes, certainly decades to come. But no one was willing to do that. Somehow this kind of slightly simple-minded view of democracy, that, one vote in favour over the votes against and that wins, I'm really uncomfortable with that. So I'm very comfortable using surveys, referendums, etc., to consult, but I'm not comfortable having them become simple-minded decision-making processes. But then, to speak against myself, if it is a 95 in favour and 5 against, I'd really be uncomfortable going against that one. But if it's 60-40, I think someone needs to make a decision.
So as we kind of bring these things to an end, or this one to an end, there's something here for me then that says, look, it's complex when you are running something. It has complexities. It has different timelines. There's decisions to be made that can be contextual to the level that they're being made at, with the legacy that may or may not be being involved. Sometimes it's short-termism, sometimes it's very strategic. And that's true everywhere. And the people at the top are valuable. They can ask you, they can not ask you, they can just push on with their own agenda, they can be incredibly inclusive. Guess what? All things are probably true at some point. So I think I asked this question at the end, and we spoke about it before we started recording, as you helped me formulate the question. Do I have a voice? I'm going to say, yes, you do. Now, whether or not and will it be heard? Yeah, possibly. Will it be acted on? Who knows? It's not really whether or not it gets acted on. It's the fact that you mustn't stop having a voice. I think that's the most important starting point. There's the perfect world, and there's battles you can have to change the reality that you're operating in. But the moment you stop giving it and offering it and verbalizing it, that's when the only person that's losing is you.
I think that's right. For my conclusion is, you have a voice, but you don't have a veto. You have influence, but you may not have power. And that's okay, provided on balance, we believe that we live in a country in which more decisions are made right than wrong. If not, we better change the way we lead and govern our country and our system of democracy.
Okay. Well, on that note, sir, as always, and as we're doing these ones, as we said, we're not going to come up with the answer. We'll have the conversations, and we'll see where it takes us. So I'm going to bring us to an end. Yeah. I love that. You have a voice, not a veto. And I'm going to say, and that means just, exercise the right to have a voice. Perfect. I love it. So on that note, I'll bring us to a close. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Guy.
That's it. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.